This is Mark. It's Tuesday night. The kitchen is quiet. The lights are on, but nothing feels warm. Mark works full-time, 40 hours, sometimes more. No shortcuts, no gaps, no excuses. He went to school. He took the job. He paid his bills on time. He didn't gamble. He didn't quit. He didn't give up. And yet, every month, he's a little further behind. Not because he's reckless, not because he's lazy, but because something keeps taking more than it used to. Rent comes first, then groceries, then insurance, then whatever's left decides how the rest of the month goes. Mark looks at his bank app the same way every night, not to spend, just to make sure nothing breaks. One flat tire, one medical bill, one bad week. That's all it would take. This is what doing everything right looks like in America now. And here's the uncomfortable truth. This isn't about inflation. It's about something much worse. Because prices didn't just go up. They moved and never came back down. And while Mark kept working, the floor underneath him kept rising. Quietly, relentlessly. This is the real cost of living in America. And most people don't see it until they're already behind. On paper, things look better. That's what the numbers say. Wages are up. Employment is strong. The economy is resilient. On paper, this should feel like progress. But in real life, nothing feels cheaper. Not the rent, not the groceries, not the insurance. Not even the small things people used to stop thinking about. People open their bank apps more often now. Not to check investments, not to plan vacations, just to make sure the balance still makes sense. And every time they check, it feels a little tighter than last month. This is the part that doesn't show up in headlines. Because income didn't collapse. It rose. But the feeling of stability disappeared, and that feeling matters more than the number. In 2019, a raise felt like relief. In 2025, a raise feels like catching up to bills that already moved on without you. People aren't asking, how can I get ahead? They're asking something quieter, something heavier. How do I stop falling behind? Take rent. Not the extreme cases, not luxury cities, just normal rent. The kind that used to take a third of your paycheck. Now it decides the entire month. Rent comes out first, before food, before savings, before anything else gets a vote. And once it's gone, everything else fights over what's left. Groceries come next. Same store, same aisles, same brands. But somehow, the cart fills up faster and costs more. People don't even react anymore. They just sigh, swipe the card, and quietly put one thing back. Insurance doesn't feel like protection now. It feels like a subscription you're scared to cancel. You pay every month, hoping you never have to use it. Because if you do, you might not be able to afford the bill anyway. This isn't panic. It's something worse. It's normalization. People adjust. They cut back. They downgrade expectations. They stop calling it temporary. They stop saying, once things settle down, because things never really settled, they reset. Think about life in 2019, not the politics, not the news cycle, just the texture of everyday life. Rent was stressful, but manageable. Groceries were annoying, but predictable. A surprise bill was frustrating, not terrifying. There was room to breathe. Not luxury, not abundance, just margin. In 2025, margin is gone. Every category expanded, every bill got heavier, and none of them asked permission. This isn't about one big expense. It's about everything becoming expensive at once. That's the shock. People didn't notice the moment it happened. They noticed the feeling that followed, that constant background tension, the sense that no matter how carefully you plan, something is always waiting to go wrong. And here's the part nobody likes to admit. Most people blame themselves first. They assume they mismanaged. They assume they fell behind. They assume they did something wrong. But look closer. They're working. They're budgeting. They're sacrificing. And it's still not enough. This is where the old promise breaks. The promise that says, if you work hard, play by the rules, and stay disciplined, you'll be okay. That promise used to be true often enough that people trusted it. Now, people follow it perfectly and still feel trapped. They skip vacations. They delay doctor's visits. They say maybe next year so often. It stops meaning anything. They don't feel poor. They feel exposed. One missed paycheck, one medical issue, one unexpected repair, That's all it takes. And that fear, that constant calculation, is new. Because this isn't about luxury disappearing, it's about stability becoming fragile. The numbers say incomes are up, but real life says security is down. And when those two stories don't match, people feel it in their bodies, in their sleep, in their relationships, in the way they think about the future. This isn't just financial pressure, it's psychological pressure. Because every decision now carries weight. Every purchase feels like a trade-off. Not, do I want this? But what am I giving up if I say yes? That's not normal. And deep down, people know it. They just don't hear it said out loud. So if this feels personal, if it feels uncomfortably familiar, that's because it is. This isn't happening to some people. It's happening quietly across millions of households at the same time. And this is only the beginning. Because once the shock wears off, what comes next is far harder to escape. Rent is where everything breaks. Not dramatically, not all at once, quietly, relentlessly. Rent is the first bill people plan around, the first number they subtract, the first line that decides how the rest of the month is allowed to exist. And in 2025, rent doesn't just take money, it takes options. On paper, wages went up, but rent went up first. And faster. Every raise arrives late, already spent by an apartment you signed for months ago. People don't feel like rent is high. They feel like rent is immovable, because no matter what they do, it's always waiting. Rent doesn't care about overtime. It doesn't care about effort. It doesn't care if the year was hard. It comes out anyway. And once it does, everything else becomes conditional. Groceries depend on it. Savings depend on it. Healthcare depends on it. Life fits into whatever space rent leaves behind. For a long time, moving was the escape hatch. If rent got too high, you moved. Different neighborhood, different building, different city sometimes. That option used to keep things balanced. It doesn't anymore. Moving costs more now. Deposits are higher, application fees stack up, credit checks get stricter, and every listing looks the same. Same prices, same language, same promises. People scroll for hours and realize they're not choosing the best option. They're choosing the least bad one. Moving no longer feels like progress. It feels like lateral damage. You don't move to get ahead. You move to stop bleeding. And sometimes, even that doesn't work. What used to be a solution has turned into a trap because rent didn't just rise. It synchronized. Prices moved together across neighborhoods, across cities, across states. The idea of just moving somewhere cheaper sounds logical until you try. Cheaper doesn't mean affordable anymore. It just means slightly less impossible. And every time someone moves, they realize something uncomfortable. The apartment costs more, but nothing feels better. The walls are thinner, the appliances are older, the space is smaller, but the price says luxury, luxury floors, luxury lighting, luxury amenities you'll never use. What people actually get is the same quality of life at a higher price. This is the part nobody says out loud. Rent isn't high because demand is crazy. It's high because moving is no longer an option. Landlords know it. Property managers know it. Investors definitely know it. When tenants can't leave, prices don't need to compete. They just need to reset. Every renewal becomes a test. Not can you afford this, but how badly do you want to avoid moving? People don't negotiate rent anymore. They brace for it. They open the email slowly. They scan for the percentage increase. They do the math in their head, not to see if it's fair, but to see if survival is still possible. And most of the time, they say yes, not because they want to, because saying no costs even more. This is how rent traps people, not through greed alone, but through friction. Too expensive to stay, too expensive to leave, so people stay. They adjust. They shrink their lives around square footage that costs more than it ever has. They buy fewer things. They host fewer people. They make fewer plans, not because they changed, but because rent changed the rules. In 2019, rent was a stressor. In 2025, it's a limiter. It doesn't just affect where you live, it affects how you think. People delay relationships, delay kids, delay medical care, because rent already claimed the future. And here's the part that feels unfair. Most renters did nothing wrong. They didn't overextend. They didn't speculate. They didn't take risks. They just signed a lease. and watched it become heavier every year. No upgrades, no improvements, no added value, just a higher number attached to the same space. That's why people feel angry, but tired. There's no villain to point at, no single moment to blame, just a system that quietly repriced shelter faster than wages could follow. And shelter isn't optional. You can't skip it for a month. You can't downsize it to zero. You can't hustle your way out of it. Rent gets paid before motivation matters. That's why everything else feels fragile. Because when the biggest expense keeps expanding, every other part of life becomes unstable. People don't feel like they live somewhere anymore. They feel like they're borrowing space from a system that can take it back with 30 days notice. And that changes how people see the future. They don't plan 5 years ahead. They plan lease to lease. They don't ask, where do I want to be? They ask, where can I still afford to exist? This is what the first trap looks like. Not poverty, not collapse, constraint, the slow realization that no matter how hard you work, the biggest cost in your life moves faster than you do. And once rent takes control, everything else starts falling into place in the worst way possible. Because rent isn't just a bill, it's the foundation every other decision rests on. And in 2025, that foundation is no longer stable. It's shifting upward, quietly. And once you're caught inside it, getting out is harder than anyone wants to admit. Food is where people notice it first, not because it's dramatic, but because it never stops. You don't pay for food once a month. You pay for it every few days, over and over again. And in 2025, food doesn't shock people anymore. It drains them. The grocery store feels familiar. Same parking lot, same automatic doors, same shelves. But the experience is different. People move slower now. They read prices more carefully. They pause longer in the aisles, not deciding what they want, deciding what they can live without. Groceries didn't get expensive all at once. They changed quietly. A few cents here, $1 there, a smaller box, a thinner package, enough that you notice, but not enough to fight. People adapted without realizing it. They stopped buying extras. Then they stopped buying favorites. Then they stopped buying anything that didn't feel essential. And still, the total kept climbing. That's the part nobody talks about. Food prices didn't spike once and then come back down. They reset permanently. People remember when inflation was supposed to be temporary. When prices were supposed to stabilize, they stabilized, just at a higher level. Now every grocery run feels like a negotiation, not between brands, but between needs. Do I buy fruit this week? Or wait until next? Do I cook something fresh? Or stretch what's already there? People don't shop for meals anymore. They shop for endurance. And then there's eating out, something that used to mean convenience or a small reward. In 2025, eating out feels like a decision you have to justify. Menus look different now, not just more expensive, more careful, smaller portions, higher prices, extra charges everywhere, service fees, delivery fees, tips calculated on top of inflated totals. A simple meal becomes a calculation. Not, is this good? But is this worth it? And most of the time, the answer is no. People still go out, but less often. And when they do, they enjoy it less. Because the whole time, they're thinking about the cost. Not just the money, but what that money could have covered instead. One dinner out equals several grocery runs. One coffee habit equals a utility bill. So people cut back. They cook more. They plan more. They repeat meals. Not because they want to, but because they have to. And even then, the budget keeps tightening because the size of things change too. The box is smaller. The bag is lighter. The count is lower. Same price. Less product. People notice. But they're too tired to say anything. They feel it when the food runs out sooner. When the package empties faster than it used to, nothing is missing enough to call it a problem. But everything is missing something. That's how it works. Not dramatic enough to spark outrage. Just constant enough to wear people down. Daily life gets more expensive in 100 small ways. Laundry costs more. Cleaning supplies don't last as long. Basic household items disappear faster. Individually, none of it feels catastrophic. Together, it becomes suffocating. People start skipping little comforts, not luxuries. Comforts. The brand they liked, the snack they looked forward to. The small things that made routines feel human. Those disappear quietly. And when people talk about it, they downplay it. They joke about it. They shrug it off. Because admitting it feels like failure. But it isn't. It's math. When prices move up and never return, something has to give. And that something is quality of life. People eat differently now. Not healthier. Cheaper. More filler. More repetition. Less variety. Not because they don't know better, but because better costs more. And this is where the pressure compounds. Because food isn't optional, you can't delay it forever. You can't ignore it without consequences. So the trade-offs get harder. Do I buy less food now? Or rely on credit later? Do I stretch this week? Or risk next? This is the silent bleed. Not one big cut, but hundreds of tiny ones. Each one manageable. All of them together exhausting. And the worst part? People are blamed for it. They're told to budget better, shop smarter, cook more, as if they're not already doing all of that. As if discipline can reverse prices that never came down. People aren't careless with food anymore. They're hyper-aware. Every receipt is checked. Every total is noticed. And every time, there's a small moment of disbelief, not shock, resignation. Because this is normal now. Higher prices, smaller sizes, fewer options. This is daily life. And daily life is where pressure builds fastest. Not in emergencies, not in disasters, in routines. When every routine costs more than it used to, stress becomes constant. People don't panic. They endure. They normalize the idea that things will always be tighter, that food will always cost more, that cheap will never mean cheap again. And that realization sinks in slowly. Prices didn't spike once. They reset permanently. And once that happens, the damage doesn't look dramatic. It looks like fatigue. It looks like people doing math every time they eat. It looks like joy becoming conditional. And by the time people fully notice it, their budget is already bleeding, quietly, every single day. Healthcare is different. Not because it's the most expensive thing, but because it's the most unpredictable. Rent takes your money. Food drains your budget. Healthcare takes your sense of safety. In 2025, most Americans technically have insurance. That's what the forms say. That's what the cards in their wallets say. But insurance doesn't feel like protection anymore. It feels like a toll you pay to avoid something worse. Premiums rise every year, even when nothing happens, even when you don't use it, even when you're healthy. You pay more. For the privilege of not getting sick, people notice it quietly. A few dollars more each paycheck, then a little more the next year. It never feels dramatic until you add it up. And then there's the deductible, a word people didn't think about much before. Now it's the number that decides whether you see a doctor at all. The deductible isn't just high, it's high enough to make people hesitate, high enough to make them wait, high enough to make them Google symptoms instead, high enough to turn medical care into a last resort. People don't ask, "Do I need to see a doctor?" They ask, "Can I afford to find out?" That question changes everything. Small things get ignored, pain gets normalized, checkups get postponed, not because people are careless, but because the system trained them to be afraid. Afraid of the bill, afraid of the explanation of benefits, afraid of the envelope that arrives weeks later, with numbers that don't make sense. Healthcare bills don't come all at once. They arrive in pieces. One charge now, another later, another you didn't expect. Each one small enough to survive. Together, enough to break you. This is the invisible tax. You pay it whether you're sick or not. You pay it in premiums. You pay it in stress. You pay it in avoidance. And the worst part? You never know how much it will be. A visit could be fine, or it could change everything. Same doctor, same symptoms, wildly different outcome. That uncertainty sits in people's minds all the time. They feel it when their chest hurts, when their kid has a fever, when something doesn't feel right. Not panic, calculation. Let's wait and see. Let's give it a day. Let's hope it goes away. Hope becomes a strategy, because the alternative is risk, and risk is expensive. People with insurance still fear emergencies, sometimes more than people without, because they know how fragile their finances are. They know one ambulance ride can undo years of careful budgeting, one ER visit, one overnight stay, one unexpected test. That's all it takes. not to ruin a life, but to collapse it. Savings disappear first, then credit cards, then payment plans. Medical debt doesn't feel like other debt. It feels unfair, personal, humiliating. People don't talk about it. They hide it. They blame themselves for something they couldn't control. And this fear leaks into everyday life. People avoid activities they used to enjoy. They're more cautious, more careful. Not because they're older, but because they're exposed. Healthcare used to be about getting better. Now it's about damage control. Even preventive care feels risky. You go in for one thing, they find something else. That leads to another test, another bill. The system doesn't feel malicious. It feels indifferent. It keeps charging, whether you're prepared or not. And people know this. That's why health insurance is one of the first things people complain about, and one of the last things they dare to drop. They hate it. They fear losing it. Because without it, everything feels one step from disaster. But even with it, disaster is still possible, just more complicated. This is why people feel trapped. They pay more every year, for less certainty. They do everything right. They stay insured. They follow the rules. And still, they're one emergency away. That phrase isn't exaggeration. It's math. Most households don't have the cash to absorb a serious medical event. They know it. That knowledge sits quietly in the background of their lives. It shapes decisions. It shapes priorities. It shapes fear. People don't talk about healthcare costs the way they talk about rent or groceries. They talk about it in whispers, in warnings, in just-in-case conversations. Because healthcare isn't just expensive when you're sick. It's expensive so you're scared to get sick. That fear is intentional, not designed by one person, but built into the structure. High deductibles discourage use. Complex billing discourages questions. Delayed statements discourage clarity. The system works best when people hesitate, and hesitation becomes habit. People delay care until problems become emergencies. Emergencies cost more. They cause more damage. They create more debt. The cycle feeds itself. And the emotional cost is just as heavy. People feel guilty for being sick, ashamed for needing help, anxious about getting answers. That's not how healthcare is supposed to feel, but it's how it feels now. This is why the fear is real, not loud, not dramatic, constant. Healthcare isn't a service anymore. It's a gamble. And most people know they can't afford to lose. So they live carefully, quietly, hoping nothing goes wrong. Because if it does, it won't just hurt their body. It will hit their entire financial life at once. And when that happens, everything else we've talked about, rent, food, debt, collapses faster. This is the invisible tax, paid in money, paid in fear, paid in silence. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. Because from that moment on, every cough, every pain, every checkup comes with the same thought. Can I afford this? Debt doesn't arrive like a disaster. It doesn't crash into your life. It seeps in, quietly, patiently. Most people don't wake up one day buried in debt. They wake up one day, tired of juggling. At first, debt feels helpful. A credit card to smooth things out. A car loan to keep life moving. A student loan that promised a future. None of it feels dangerous in the beginning. It feels normal. Everyone has it. Everyone uses it. Everyone says it's manageable. And for a while, it is. Then interest starts doing what it was designed to do. Not punish you, pull you. Interest doesn't hit all at once. It compounds. It takes a little bit every month. So little you barely notice. Until you do. Credit cards are the first gravity well. Not because people overspend, but because prices rose faster than paychecks. Groceries go on the card. Car repairs go on the card. Medical bills go on the card. Not luxuries. Life. The balance creeps up. Minimum payments look small enough to ignore. And that's the trick. Minimum payments don't pay debt down. They keep it alive. Interest collects quietly in the background. Month after month. People pay faithfully and watch the balance barely move. That's when the confusion sets in. I'm paying every month? Why am I still stuck? Because interest isn't a fee. It's gravity. The more you carry, the harder it is to move. Auto loans come next. Cars used to be transportation. Now they're financial commitments, measured in years. Longer terms. Higher prices. Higher rates. People don't buy cars anymore. They sign into them. And once you're in, you can't get out easily. You need the car to work. You need work to pay the loan. You need the loan to keep the car. That loop tightens slowly. Student loans never really leave. They sit quietly in the background of adulthood. They don't shout. They don't threaten. They just wait. Every major life decision runs into them eventually. Saving for a home, starting a family, taking a risk. Student loans don't block the future. They narrow it. And then there's buy now, pay later. The newest promise. No interest. No problem. Just split it up. It doesn't feel like debt. It feels like flexibility. Until it stacks. One payment here. Another there. Another next month. Each one small. All of them together heavy. Buy now, pay later doesn't break budgets. It blurs them. People lose track. Not because they're irresponsible, but because the system is designed that way. Debt stops feeling like a choice and starts feeling like a condition. Every month becomes a series of obligations. Rent first, utilities, food, insurance, then debt gets whatever is left. And whatever's left is rarely enough. So people make trade-offs. They skip savings. They delay emergencies. They tell themselves they'll catch up later. Later never comes, because interest doesn't pause. It keeps pulling. This is why saving feels impossible. Not because people don't want to save, but because debt eats the margin first. Savings require space. Debt eliminates space. Every dollar that could have gone forward gets pulled backward instead. People don't feel like they're falling behind. They feel like they're running on a treadmill that keeps speeding up. They work harder. They earn more. They still can't get traction. Because gravity doesn't care how hard you run. It cares how much weight you're carrying. Debt doesn't ruin people fast. It drains them quietly. It drains energy. It drains hope. It drains patience. People stop dreaming long-term. They think in billing cycles. They don't ask, where do I want to be in 5 years? They ask, what clears this month? And that mindset spreads. Relationships feel heavier. Risk feels impossible. Rest feels undeserved. Because debt is always there, waiting. And the most exhausting part, people blame themselves. They think they made bad choices. They think they failed. But look closer. Most debt didn't come from excess. It came from survival, from covering gaps that shouldn't have existed, from bridging the distance between income and reality. Debt didn't create the pressure. It absorbed it, and now it releases that pressure. Slowly, every month, with interest. This is the financial gravity people can't see. Not a cliff, not a crash, a pull, always downward. And the longer you're in it, the harder it is to remember what it felt like without it. That's why people feel stuck, not trapped by one decision, but by years of quiet compromises. Each one reasonable, each one necessary. Until together, they become heavy. And once debt takes hold, saving stops being a habit. It becomes a fantasy. Because you can't build upward when everything keeps pulling you down. For a long time, work was the answer. If money felt tight, you worked harder. If things got expensive, you pushed more hours. That idea built America. And for decades, it worked. But something changed. In 2025, work still takes your time, but it no longer buys security. Wages did go up. People see it on their paychecks. A raise here, a promotion there, sometimes a new job altogether. On paper, progress. But before that money even lands, it's already gone. Rent moved first, long before the raise, long before the offer letter, long before the paycheck clears. Insurance followed right behind it. Premiums adjusted upward, quietly, without asking how much you make. Food didn't wait either. Prices rose early, stayed high, and never checked back in with wages. So when income finally increases, it doesn't feel like winning. It feels like arriving late to a bill that's been growing in your absence. People don't feel richer after raises anymore. They feel briefly relieved. And then reality settles back in. This is where the promise breaks. The old deal was simple. Work more, earn more, get ahead. Now the deal feels different. Work more, earn more, stay in place. People aren't standing still because they stopped trying. They're standing still because the ground keeps moving. That's why so many people add side hustles. Not for ambition, for survival. Driving at night, freelancing on weekends, selling time they no longer have. Side hustles are framed as empowerment, but for most people, they're exhaustion with a brand name. A second job doesn't feel like opportunity. It feels like losing the last pieces of rest. People wake up tired. They go to sleep tired. And the gap between those moments keeps filling with work. Not because they want more, but because they need to stop the bleeding. And still, it doesn't add up, because every extra dollar runs into the same wall. Rent absorbs it. Insurance absorbs it. Food absorbs it. The system is structured, so effort arrives last. People don't quit because they're lazy. They quit because they're depleted. They've already optimized everything. They commute efficiently. They budget carefully. They plan ahead. There's nothing left to squeeze. So when someone says, just work harder, it lands differently now. It sounds disconnected, outdated, almost cruel. Because people are already working hard. They're just not being rewarded the way they were promised. This creates a new kind of stress. Not the stress of poverty, but the stress of betrayal. People did what they were told. They studied. They showed up. They stayed productive. And the reward feels smaller every year. Not because they failed, but because the system recalibrated without telling them. This is why burnout feels universal. Not just in one industry, not just one age group, across offices, across warehouses, across service jobs. People are tired in the same way. A deep tired. The kind that sleep doesn't fix. Because it's not physical, it's motivational. When effort stops leading to progress, the body keeps going. But the mind starts resisting. People still show up. They just don't believe anymore. They don't believe the next raise will change things. They don't believe the next promotion will fix it. They don't believe working weekends will buy freedom. They do it anyway. Because stopping isn't an option. And that's the trap. Work became mandatory, not meaningful. It's no longer a ladder. It's a treadmill. Faster pace. Same place. People aren't lazy. They're exhausted. Exhausted from adapting. Exhausted from optimizing. Exhausted from doing everything right and still feeling behind. This is what happens when wages chase costs instead of leading them. Work stops being a solution and starts being maintenance. Just enough to survive. Never enough to get ahead. And when that happens, people don't give up loudly. They withdraw quietly. They stop planning. They stop dreaming. They stop believing effort will be rewarded. They don't quit work. They quit hope. And once that happens, no amount of motivation speeches can bring it back. Because this isn't a mindset problem. It's a math problem. And the math no longer works. Up to this point, everything has felt personal. Your rent, your bills, your debt, your exhaustion. And that's intentional. Because when pressure feels personal, people blame themselves. They assume they mismanaged. They assume they fell behind. They assume they failed. But what if this isn't personal at all? What if what millions of people are experiencing is the result of a system doing exactly what it was designed to do? Not malfunctioning, not collapsing, working. Systems don't have feelings. They don't care if you're stressed. They don't care if you're tired. They respond to incentives. And in America, the incentives changed. Start with housing. Landlords don't price rent based on your income. They price it based on what the market will tolerate. When moving becomes harder, tolerance goes up. When tenants can't easily leave, prices don't need to compete. They just need to increase carefully, a little each year, just enough to stay ahead of wages, not enough to trigger revolt. From the system's perspective, that's not greed, that's optimization. Insurance works the same way. Insurance companies don't make money when you use care. They make money when you don't. Premiums rise predictably. Deductibles rise quietly. Coverage becomes more complex, not to deny care outright, but to discourage it. Confusion is not a bug, it's a feature. The harder it is to understand the bill, the less likely people are to question it. From the system's point of view, that's efficiency. Now look at financial institutions. Banks don't profit when you save a little. They profit when you borrow a lot. Interest isn't punishment, it's revenue. Longer loan terms, smaller monthly payments, bigger total costs. Everything structured to feel manageable now and expensive later. From the outside, it looks predatory. From inside the system, it's perfectly logical. None of these players wake up trying to ruin lives. They wake up trying to maximize return. And when every part of the system chases return, pressure concentrates on the same place, the individual. That's why this feels coordinated, even though it isn't. Housing pushes up, healthcare pushes up, debt pulls down, each one acting rationally, together creating strain. This is the part people miss. The system doesn't need villains to produce harm. It just needs incentives that don't care about human limits. People ask, how did it get this bad? It didn't get bad suddenly. It got efficient. Every sector optimized for profit. Every risk shifted downward. Every buffer removed. Stability used to be built into the system. Now, stability is something individuals are expected to create on their own, with stagnant margins, with rising costs, with constant uncertainty. That's not a failure of effort, it's a change in design. In the old system, work created leverage. In the current one, work maintains access. You work to stay housed. You work to stay insured. You work to service debt, not to build, to maintain. That's why people feel like they're running in place. They are. The system isn't broken. It's optimized, just not for you. Optimized for rent extraction. Optimized for premium collection. Optimized for interest accumulation. And optimization doesn't ask how tired people are. It asks how much pressure they can tolerate before something breaks. So far, people have adapted. They cut back. They hustle. They delay. The system reads that as success because adaptation means compliance. As long as people keep paying, the system keeps working. And when people struggle quietly, nothing signals the need to change. This is why the pressure feels endless. Not because no one notices, but because the system interprets endurance as capacity. If you survive it, it assumes you can handle more. That's the trap. People think the system will eventually ease, but systems don't ease on their own. They continue until incentives change or something forces adjustment. And right now, the pressure is perfectly distributed, not enough to cause collapse, just enough to cause exhaustion. That's the most stable configuration. From a system's perspective, but from a human one, it's unsustainable. Because people aren't numbers. They aren't margins. They aren't tolerance thresholds. They're lives. And when a system quietly drains millions of lives at once, the damage doesn't look like chaos. It looks like resignation, like people lowering expectations, like young adults postponing futures, like families one emergency away. That's the signal most people miss. The system isn't failing. It's succeeding at something very different than it used to. And once you see that, the shame starts to lift. Because this was never about working harder, or budgeting better, or trying more. It was about living inside a structure that slowly moved the goalposts, while asking you to keep running. And that realization changes everything. Because if the problem isn't personal, then the fear you've been feeling was never a weakness. It was awareness. And what comes next depends on how long people are expected to carry a system that no longer carries them back. At some point, people stop asking when things will get better. They start asking what kind of future this leads to. Not in theory, in real life. Look closely, and the shape of that future is already forming. The middle class doesn't disappear, it changes. Owning becomes rare. Renting becomes permanent. Not because people don't want homes, but because homes moved out of reach, faster than incomes could follow. People don't talk about buying anymore. They talk about renewing leases, renewing contracts, renewing the same life, year after year. Stability becomes temporary. Everything feels provisional. You don't build, you maintain, and maintenance is expensive. The idea of being one emergency away stops sounding dramatic. It becomes accurate. One illness, one accident, one job loss, not a collapse, a slide. Savings disappear first, then credit fills the gap, then interest takes over. This is the future many people are already living. Not poor, not secure, balanced on a thin line that can snap at any moment. This changes how people think. They don't plan decades ahead, they plan months. They don't ask, what do I want my life to look like? They ask, what can I afford to risk? Dreams become conditional. Kids later, homes later, rest later. Later becomes a moving target that never arrives. This is how the American dream shifts. It doesn't vanish overnight. It shrinks. It transforms from owning to surviving, From building something to holding on. People still work, still try, still hope, but hope becomes cautious, measured. People stop expecting more. They expect stability, and even that feels uncertain. The dream used to be upward, each generation doing a little better, a little safer, a little more secure. Now the dream feels defensive. Don't lose ground. Don't fall behind. Don't make a mistake. That's not ambition. That's survival. And when survival becomes the goal, everything else gets pushed aside. Creativity, risk, community, all replaced by calculation. This is why the future feels heavy, not because people gave up, but because they adjusted expectations to match reality. The American dream didn't disappear. It got more expensive than most people can afford. And when a dream prices out the people who were promised it, the cost isn't just economic, it's emotional, it's generational, and it doesn't show up all at once. It shows up quietly, in delayed lives, smaller hopes, and a constant sense that something fundamental shifted without anyone asking permission. There's no dramatic ending to this story, no single moment where everything breaks. That's what makes it harder to see. Life continues. People wake up, go to work, pay bills, repeat. From the outside, everything looks normal, but inside, something changed. The pressure never leaves, the math never works, and the feeling follows people everywhere. At the grocery store, in the doctor's office, before opening rent emails, before checking bank balances. It's not panic, it's weight. The quiet understanding that effort no longer guarantees progress, that doing everything right doesn't mean you're safe, that no matter how careful you are, you're still exposed. This is the real cost of living in America. It isn't just money, it's the constant feeling that no matter how hard you try, you're still behind, and that feeling doesn't fade. When the video ends, it follows people back into their lives, fade out,